Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving deep into the intricate world of the human brain. We'll be exploring Brain Facts, a primer on the brain and nervous system.
Okay.
It's published by the Society for Neuroscience. They're dedicated to understanding the nervous system,
Yeah.
promoting neuroscience education,
Right.
and informing the public about research findings. Get ready for some mind-blowing insights as we cover everything from the brain's building blocks to how we learn,
Ah.
how we move, sleep, age, and even potential therapies for neurological disorders.
Okay.
A 3-pound mass of tissue, essentially the command center for our entire existence.
Yeah.
But how does it actually work?
Well,
What are the key players in this intricate neural symphony?
imagine a vast network of interconnected highways,
Okay.
constantly buzzing with activity.
Yeah.
That's your brain. And the vehicles traveling those highways are neurons.
Okay, so neurons are like the tiny messengers,
Yeah.
zipping around, relaying information. But how do they actually communicate?
You're thinking tiny wires and electrical impulses?
Yeah, something like that.
You're on the right track.
Okay.
Neurons communicate through electrical and chemical signals. An incredibly efficient system. Think of it like this. An electrical impulse travels down the neuron's axon,
Okay.
like a spark along a wire. When this impulse reaches the end, it triggers the release of neurotransmitter.
Neurotransmitters.
Yeah.
Those are the chemical messengers, right?
Exactly. They're released into the synapse,
Okay.
the tiny gap between neurons, and bind to specific receptors on the receiving neuron,
Gotcha.
like a lock and key system.
Okay.
Each neurotransmitter fitting into its designated receptor.
So that's how the message gets passed from one neuron to the next. It's amazing how precise this process is.
It is. And each neurotransmitter has its own unique role to play.
Okay.
Some, like glutamate, excite the receiving neuron, encouraging it to fire. Others, like GABA, inhibit activity, essentially acting as a brake.
So it's a constant dance of excitation and inhibition with these neurotransmitters orchestrating the whole thing.
Yeah.
That makes me wonder, what happens when this delicate balance is disrupted? I'm thinking of things like Parkinson's disease, where dopamine, a neurotransmitter involved in movement, is depleted.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
It highlights the crucial role that neurotransmitters play in maintaining normal brain function. In Parkinson's, the loss of dopamine-producing neurons leads to those classic motor symptoms, like tremors and rigidity.
It's fascinating
Yeah.
and a bit scary to think how these tiny chemical messengers can have such a profound impact on our lives.
Absolutely.
I know we'll get into potential therapies later,
Yeah.
but it's mind-blowing to realize just how complex the system is.
And it's not just about individual neurons and neurotransmitters.
Right.
We also have to consider how these billions of neurons are organized.
Right, because it's not just a random jumble of cells.
Yeah.
There's structure, there's development, there's a whole story unfolding here. Speaking of development, let's rewind the clock a bit.
Okay.
How does this intricate neural network even come into being?
It starts incredibly early,
Okay.
just a few weeks after conception. Imagine a tiny human embryo, barely a tenth of an inch long,
Okay.
starting to form a flat sheet of cells called the neural plate.
Wait, so our brain starts out as a flat sheet?
It does.
Oh.
And then, like origami, it folds in on itself to form the neural tube.
Okay.
That tube eventually becomes our entire central nervous system,
Wow.
both brain and spinal cord. It's a delicate and intricate process.
That's incredible. I
Yeah.
never would have guessed that our brain starts out so simple and then undergoes this amazing transformation.
It is amazing.
So how do these neurons know where to go and how to connect?
Oh.
It's like a massive construction project with billions of workers.
It's more like a beautifully choreographed dance
Okay.
than a construction project. New neurons are born and then migrate to their designated locations.
Okay.
Guided by chemical signals, they extend their axons,
Okay.
searching for their target neurons, making trillions of connections.
So it's like they're reaching out, forming these intricate pathways. But I imagine there's some trial and error involved, right?
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
The developing brain actually produces way more neurons and connections than it ultimately needs.
Wow.
There's a pruning process that occurs,
Okay.
eliminating redundant or faulty connections.
Okay.
Kind of like refining a sculpture.
So it's not just about building connections, it's also about refining and sculpting them. Is there a certain time frame when this development is most critical? I've heard about these critical periods in brain development.
Yes. Those are windows of opportunity.
Okay.
When the brain is especially sensitive to certain experiences. For example, early visual input is crucial for the development of the visual system. If a child is born with a condition like strabismus, where the eyes don't align properly, the brain might not develop normal vision.
Wow.
If it's not corrected early on.
So it's like there's a deadline for some of these developmental milestones.
In a way, yes.
Okay.
But here's the thing. Even though these critical periods exist, the brain retains a remarkable degree of plasticity throughout life. It's this ability to adapt and change in response to experiences. So while early experiences are crucial, we're not necessarily stuck with the neural wiring we're born with.
Right.
The brain can continue to learn and rewire itself throughout our lives.
That's incredibly reassuring.
Yeah.
So even if we miss out on some of those early opportunities, there's still hope for growth and development.
Absolutely.
But it also makes me wonder, what are some of the things that can disrupt this delicate dance of brain development? Are there things that can go wrong?
Unfortunately, yes. Exposure to certain substances during pregnancy, like alcohol or cocaine, can interfere with neuronal migration and lead to developmental problems. Even stress can have a negative impact on the developing brain.
It seems like creating a safe and nurturing environment is crucial for fostering healthy brain development.
Absolutely. And on the flip side, enriched environments, those that offer stimulation and challenge, can actually benefit brain development at any age.
Really?
It's this use it or lose it principle.
Okay.
The brain thrives on novelty and challenge.
So learning new things, challenging ourselves, it's not just about acquiring knowledge. It's about keeping our brains healthy and adaptable.
Absolutely.
I love that. But let's talk about how we actually experience the world through our senses. How does the brain take in all that sensory information and make sense of it? It's kind of magical when you think about it.
It is magical. Our senses provide a constant stream of information about the world around us.
Yeah.
And it's up to the brain to decode those signals.
Right.
And create a coherent perception. Let's start with vision.
Okay.
One of the most complex and well-studied senses.
Makes sense.
We're constantly bombarded with light, and somehow our brains manage to transform those light waves into a meaningful picture of our surroundings.
I know, right? I've always wondered about that. How does the brain actually see what's happening behind the scenes?
Well, think of the eye as a camera.
Okay.
Light enters through the cornea and the lens, which focus the image onto the retina at the back of the eye.
Right.
The retina contains specialized photoreceptor cells called rods and cones.
Rods and cones. Those are the cells that detect light, right?
Exactly. Rods are highly sensitive to dim light, allowing us to see in low light conditions. But they don't distinguish colors. Cones, on the other hand, are responsible for color vision and visual acuity.
Okay.
We have 3 types of cones, each sensitive to a different range of wavelengths.
Okay.
Red, green, and blue. It's the combined activity of these cones that gives us the perception of all the colors we see.
So it's like a complex color mixing system happening right in our eyes. But what happens next? How do these signals from the rods and cones get to the brain?
That's where the optic nerve comes in. The optic nerve carries those signals from the retina to the brain.
Okay.
Specifically to the visual cortex at the back of the head.
Okay, so we have 2 optic nerves, one from each eye. But we don't see 2 separate images.
Right.
So somewhere along the way, this information from both eyes must be combined, right?
That's right. There's a crossover point called the optic chiasma.
Okay.
Where some fibers from each optic nerve cross over to the opposite side of the brain.
Okay.
This means that the left side of the brain processes information from the right visual field and vice versa.
Ah, so that's how we get a single integrated image. And once those signals reach the visual cortex, they're processed and interpreted, ultimately giving us that conscious perception of what we're seeing. It's amazing how much processing is happening behind the scenes of something as simple as seeing.
It really is remarkable.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the visual cortex.
Right.
There are many other areas of the brain involved in visual perception.
Okay.
Analyzing things like shape, color, motion, and depth.
Wow.
It's a complex symphony of neural activity.
I'm starting to realize that our senses are far more complex than I ever imagined. All right, let's shift our focus to hearing.
Okay.
How do those vibrations in the air become the sounds we perceive?
It's all about the intricate anatomy of the ear.
Okay.
Sound waves enter the outer ear, travel down the ear canal, and vibrate the eardrum.
So the eardrum is like a drum literally vibrating in response to sound.
Exactly.
Yep.
And these vibrations are then transmitted through a chain of tiny bones in the middle ear.
Okay.
The malleus, incurgus, and stapes,
Okay.
also known as the hammer, anvil, and stirrup.
Wait, we have tiny bones in our ears?
We do.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
But why? What's their purpose?
They have a crucial role to play.
Okay.
They amplify those vibrations and pass them on to the inner ear,
Okay.
specifically to the cochlea.
The cochlea. That's the spiral-shaped structure filled with fluid, right?
You got it.
Okay.
Inside the cochlea are these amazing cells called hair cells.
Okay.
When those hair cells are stimulated by the vibrations in the fluid, they convert those mechanical signals into electrical signals.
So it's another example of a sensory relay race. Sound waves, vibrations, hair cells, electrical signals.
Exactly. And those electrical signals are then carried by the auditory nerve to the brain,
Okay.
specifically to the auditory cortex.
Okay, so just like with vision, the brain is ultimately responsible for decoding these sensory messages. But there are two auditory nerves, one from each ear.
Right.
So how is this information combined? I mean, we don't hear two separate streams of sound.
That's right. Information from both ears is integrated in the brainstem,
Okay.
allowing us to locate the source of sounds and perceive a single unified auditory scene.
Okay.
And the auditory cortex, like the visual cortex, is organized in a way that reflects the different frequencies of sound.
Right.
Some neurons are tuned to high frequencies, others to low frequencies.
So it's like the brain is creating a mental map of the soundscape. It's fascinating how organized the brain is.
Organization is key. And remember, we're talking about tens of thousands of auditory nerve fibers carrying signals from each ear, all converging on the auditory cortex, which then processes this complex symphony of neural activity, allowing us to understand speech, appreciate music, and experience the world of sound.
It's mind-blowing to think about all that's happening in our brains.
It is mind-blowing.
Just to process the sounds around us. Okay, let's move on to the chemical senses. Taste and smell. How do these two senses work together to create that incredible experience we call flavor?
It's a fascinating partnership. While taste and smell are separate senses, they work together in a very intricate way to give us a complete sensory experience.
Okay, let's break it down. Taste first.
Okay.
What's going on there?
It all starts with taste buds, those tiny sensory organs, scattered mostly on our tongues.
So every time we savor a delicious bite, we have these tiny taste buds to thank.
Exactly. Each taste bud contains about 50 to 100 sensory cells.
Wow.
And each of those cells is specialized to detect one of the basic tastes.
Okay.
Sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami.
Umami, that's the savory taste, right?
You got it.
Okay.
It's often associated with foods rich in glutamate,
Okay.
like mushrooms or aged cheese.
Interesting. So how do these taste buds actually work?
Yeah.
How do they detect those different tastes?
Imagine it like a lock and key system.
Okay.
Each taste bud has tiny hairs called microvilli that contain receptor proteins.
Okay.
When a food molecule, dissolved in saliva, comes into contact with the right receptor, it's like a key fitting into a lock. This triggers a signal that's relayed to the brain.
Ah, so it's all about those specific interactions between food molecules and receptors. And those signals travel to the brain, specifically to the gustatory cortex, which processes taste.
Exactly.
But what about smell? How does that fit into this whole flavor equation?
Smell is all about airborne molecules.
Okay.
High up in our nasal cavity, we have a patch of specialized olfactory receptor cells. Every time we inhale, we're sending those odor molecules up to those receptors.
So we're constantly sniffing out the world around us, even if we don't realize it.
We are.
And those olfactory receptors work in a similar way to the taste receptors, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They also have tiny hairs called cilia covered in receptor proteins. When an odor molecule binds to the right receptor, it triggers a signal that travels to the brain.
And those signals create that incredible variety of sense we experience.
That's right. And what's fascinating is that each receptor cell can respond to multiple odor molecules.
Wow.
And each odor molecule can activate multiple receptor cells. It's this complex interplay
Okay.
that creates the richness and nuance of our sense of smell.
I'm starting to see that our senses are far more complex and interconnected than I ever imagined.
They are.
So these olfactory signals travel to the brain just like the taste signals. But where do they end up? Is there an olfactory cortex, like the gustatory cortex for taste?
There is. But olfactory signals also travel to the limbic system.
The limbic system?
Yeah.
That's involved in emotions and memory.
Exactly.
Wait, the limbic system?
Yeah.
That's why certain smells can be so powerful in triggering memories and emotions, right?
It is.
I'm thinking of the smell of freshly baked cookies.
Yeah.
Taking me back to my childhood. Or a particular perfume reminding me of a special person.
Exactly. Smells can evoke strong emotional responses because of that direct connection to the limbic system.
That's fascinating. It's no wonder smells can be so evocative. Okay, we've covered sight, sound, taste, and smell. What about touch? It's how we physically interact with the world, but how does the brain translate those physical sensations into something we can perceive?
Touch is another incredible sense, allowing us to feel textures, temperatures, pressure, and even pain.
Okay.
It all starts with those amazing touch receptors embedded in our skin.
Touch receptors, are those like tiny sensors all over our body?
You can say that. We have different types of touch receptors,
Okay.
each specialized for a specific type of stimuli. Some respond to light touch, others to deep pressure, some to vibration, and others to changes in temperature.
So our skin is like a giant sensory organ, constantly gathering information about our surroundings.
It is. And just like with the other senses, signals from those touch receptors travel along nerves to the spinal cord.
Okay.
And then up to the brain. Ultimately, reaching the somatosensory cortex.
And I'm guessing, like the other sensory cortices, the somatosensory cortex is organized in a way that reflects the different parts of our body.
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
The somatosensory cortex has a map of our body.
Okay.
With certain areas dedicated to receiving signals from specific body parts.
Yeah.
And the size of each area is proportional to the sensitivity of that body part.
So our hands and lips, which are highly sensitive, have a larger representation in the somatosensory cortex.
Exactly. We need those areas to be highly sensitive for tasks, like manipulating objects and speaking.
It's incredible how the brain prioritizes processing power based on the importance of the sensory input. But what about pain?
Yeah.
It's not exactly a pleasant sensation, but it's obviously crucial for survival.
Pain is our body's way of alerting us to danger or damage. It's a signal that something is wrong and needs attention.
Okay.
It starts with specialized pain receptors,
Yeah.
called nociceptors, scattered throughout our body.
Nociceptors, they're like the body's alarm system going off when there's potential harm.
That's a great analogy.
Okay.
When nociceptors are activated, they send signals along nerves to the spinal cord.
Right.
And then up to the brain.
So those signals travel to the brain's pain center.
Well, it's a bit more complex than that. Pain signals are processed in various areas of the brain,
Okay.
including the thalamus, the somatosensory cortex, and the limbic system.
The limbic system again. So pain is not just a physical sensation. It also has an emotional component. That makes sense. Pain is often associated with fear, anxiety, and distress.
Exactly. The limbic system is involved in processing those emotional responses,
Okay.
making pain a much more complex experience than just a simple sensation. And what's interesting is that those pain signals can be modulated along the way.
Modulated.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
The brain can actually send signals down to the spinal cord
Okay.
that either amplify or dampen pain signals.
Really?
It's like the brain has a volume control for pain.
Wow, that's fascinating. So the brain isn't just passively receiving pain signals, it's actively involved in shaping our perception of pain?
Right.
I'm starting to appreciate just how intricate this whole system is. Okay, let's move on to a topic that's equally amazing, learning and memory. It's mind-boggling to think about how our brains store all of those experiences, facts, and skills.
It is. The brain's capacity for learning and memory is truly remarkable.
Yeah.
It's what allows us to adapt, grow, and navigate the world around us.
Right.
But before we delve into the complexities of memory,
Okay.
I think it's helpful to start with a real-life case that revolutionized our understanding of this cognitive function. The case of patient HM.
Ah, HM. His story is both tragic and fascinating.
It is.
He underwent surgery to treat severe epilepsy, but the procedure, which involved removing parts of his medial temporal lobe, had some unintended consequences, right?
Yes. Unfortunately, HM lost the ability to form new long-term memories.
Oh, wow.
He could remember things from his past. But anything new just wouldn't stick. It was a profound discovery because it highlighted the crucial role of the hippocampus
Okay.
and adjacent brain areas in converting short-term memories into long-term ones.
So the hippocampus is like the brain's memory encoder.
That's a great way to think about it.
Okay.
It's not the only area involved in memory, of course. The cerebral cortex, the outermost layer of the brain, is crucial for the long-term storage of knowledge and facts.
Okay.
But the hippocampus seems to play a key role in organizing and consolidating those memories,
Right.
making them stick.
Okay.
It's like the brain's librarian,
Okay.
taking all those bits of information and filing them away in the right places.
I love that analogy.
Yeah,
So we have the hippocampus as the encoder and the cerebral cortex as the vast library.
exactly.
But what determines which memories get encoded and how strongly they're encoded?
Right.
It's not like we remember everything that happens to us.
You're right, we don't remember everything.
Yeah.
And one key factor is emotional significance. Events that trigger strong emotions, whether positive or negative,
Okay.
tend to be more memorable.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it. We often vividly remember our happiest and saddest moments.
It's like our brains have a built-in highlighter for those emotionally charged events.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that even seemingly mundane details can be etched into my memory if they're associated with a strong emotion. Like, I might not remember what I had for dinner last week, but I can vividly recall the details of a meal I had years ago that was connected to a joyful event.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the amygdala, a brain structure involved in processing emotions, seems to play a key role in this memory-enhancing effect.
So it's all of that connection between emotion and memory. Okay, but on a cellular level, how does memory actually happen?
Yeah.
What's going on in those neurons?
This is where the concept of synaptic plasticity comes in. Memories are thought to be formed through changes in the strength and number of connections between neurons.
So learning something new actually changes the physical structure of our brains.
It does.
That's mind-blowing.
It is.
So every time you learn something new, those involved neurons forge stronger connections with each other, strengthening those neural pathways. The more you use those pathways, the stronger and more efficient they become. It's like paving a road. The more traffic it gets, the smoother and wider it becomes.
That's a great analogy.
I love this idea that we're constantly shaping and reshaping our brains through our experiences. And one of the key mechanisms behind this synaptic plasticity is long-term potentiation, or LTP, right?
Exactly. LTP is a process that strengthens those synaptic connections, particularly in the hippocampus,
Okay.
making those memories more durable. It's like the brain's way of saying, hey, this information is important. Let's make sure we remember it.
It's amazing how the brain can prioritize and strengthen certain connections based on our experiences. It makes me wonder, what about forgetting? Is it just a weakening of those connections, or is there more to it?
That's a great question, and one that neuroscientists are still exploring. Forgetting is a complex process.
Okay.
And it doesn't always mean that those connections are completely erased. It could be that they become less accessible,
Okay.
or that interference from other memories makes them harder to retrieve.
Okay.
It's like having a book in the library that gets buried under a pile of other books.
Okay.
It's still there, but it might take a bit more effort to find it.
That's a helpful analogy. So it's not necessarily a loss of information, but maybe a difficulty in accessing it.
Exactly. And there are different types of forgetting, too.
Okay.
Sometimes it's a gradual fading of memories over time,
Yeah.
while other times it's a more sudden loss
Okay.
due to brain injury or trauma.
It's clear that memory is a dynamic and complex process,
Huh.
one that we're still unraveling. Okay, I know we've covered a lot of ground already,
Yeah.
but I can't resist delving into one of my favorite topics, language. It's one of the most complex cognitive functions we have, and it's heavily reliant on memory.
You're right. Language is a remarkable human ability,
Yeah.
and it's one that has fascinated scientists for centuries. We've made significant progress in understanding the brain regions
Okay.
involved in language processing,
Yeah.
but there's still much to learn.
So what do we know so far? I've heard of Broca's area and Wernicke's area. Those are key language centers in the brain, right?
They are. Broca's area, located in the frontal lobe, is primarily involved in speech production,
Okay.
while Wernicke's area, in the temporal lobe, is crucial for language comprehension.
So if someone has damage to Broca's area,
Yeah.
they might have difficulty speaking fluently.
Right.
while damage to Wernicke's area might impair their ability to understand language.
That's the general idea.
Okay.
But it's important to remember that language processing is a complex and distributed process involving many different brain regions working together.
So it's not as simple as saying that one specific area is responsible for one specific function?
Exactly. It's more like a network of interconnected regions, each contributing in its own way to the overall process. And recent research suggests that the neural basis of language is even more complex.
Oh. What have we learned?
Well, for example, studies using brain imaging techniques,
Yeah.
like Pakey scans,
Okay.
have shown that some reading tasks don't necessarily activate either Broca's or Wernicke's area.
So there might be alternative pathways for language processing.
That's what the evidence suggests.
Yeah.
It seems there's a direct route for reading comprehension
Okay.
that doesn't involve converting written words into their spoken sounds, That's
fascinating. It seems like we're constantly revising our understanding of how the brain works, even with something as fundamental as language. I'm curious, what about the role of memory in language? It seems like we must be constantly accessing our memory banks to understand and produce language.
Absolutely. Our memories play a crucial role in language. We need to remember the meanings of words, the rules of grammar, and the context of conversations. And the hippocampus, which we discussed earlier as being crucial for forming long-term memories, is also involved in language processing.
So it's like the hippocampus is pulling double duty, helping us form new memories and access those memories to understand and produce language.
Exactly. And it highlights the interconnectedness of different cognitive functions in the brain.
It's truly remarkable. Okay, let's move on to another amazing ability of the brain movement. We take it for granted, but walking, talking, playing an instrument, these are incredibly complex tasks, neurologically speaking.
You're absolutely right. Movement is a symphony of muscles and nerves orchestrated by our brains.
Yeah.
And to understand how it works, we need to start with those muscles. They contract and relax, creating the forces that move our bodies. But what controls those muscles?
Well, that's where the nervous system comes in, right? The brain sends signals to the muscles, telling them when to contract and relax.
Exactly. The key players are alpha motor neurons. They're the nerve cells that carry those signals from the brain and spinal cord to the muscle fibers.
So it's like a direct line of communication between the brain and the muscles.
Precisely. And each alpha motor neuron controls a group of muscle fibers, forming what's called a motor unit. When that neuron fires, all the muscle fibers in that unit contract.
Okay, gotcha. But how does the brain know which muscles to activate and when? It seems like there must be a feedback system in place.
You're on the right track. The brain receives constant feedback from our senses, especially from those proprioceptors embedded in our muscles and joints.
Proprioceptors, those are the sensory receptors that tell us about our body's position in space.
Exactly. They provide information about muscle length and tension, joint angles, and the overall position of our limbs. This feedback allows the brain to fine-tune movements and make adjustments as needed.
So it's like a continuous loop of communication. The brain sends signals to the muscles provide feedback, and the brain adjusts accordingly. It's a fascinating dance of neural activity.
It is. And it's happening constantly, even when we're not consciously aware of it.
I'm starting to appreciate how much is going on behind the scenes to enable us to move smoothly and effortlessly. But what about those movements that aren't so effortless? I'm thinking of learning a new skill, like playing the piano or riding a bike. How does the brain handle that?
Learning new motor skills involves strengthening and refining those neural pathways. It's a process that requires practice and repetition. As we practice a new skill, the connections between neurons in the brain and spinal cord become more efficient, allowing for smoother and more coordinated movements.
So it's like creating new neural highways and paving them for smoother traffic flow.
That's a great analogy. And the more we practice, the more ingrained those pathways become, making those movements almost automatic.
It's like building muscle memory, but it's really brain memory, right?
Exactly. And it's not just about the motor cortex and the muscles. Other brain regions, like the basal ganglia and the cerebellum, play crucial roles in coordinating and fine-tuning movements.
I'm sensing a theme here. The brain loves teamwork. It seems like every function involves multiple regions working together in harmony.
You're absolutely right. The brain is a master collaborator, and movement is no exception.
Well, after all this talk about movement and brain activity, I'm starting to feel a bit tired. Speaking of tiredness, let's delve into one of the biggest mysteries in neuroscience: sleep. We spend a third of our lives doing it, but why?
It's a great question, and one that scientists are still trying to answer definitively. We know sleep is essential for our physical and mental health, but the exact reasons why are still being investigated.
So what do we know so far? We know sleep isn't just one long, uninterrupted state. There are different stages of sleep, right?
Absolutely. And we can see those stages by measuring brain waves with an electroencephalogram, or EEG.
So it's like listening in on the brain's electrical activity.
Exactly. And what we see is that brainwave patterns change as we progress through different sleep stages.
Okay, walk me through those stages. What happens as we drift off to sleep?
Well, first, we enter a stage of light sleep, where brainwaves slow down a bit. This is the stage where you might experience those hypnic jerks, those sudden muscle twitches that sometimes wake you up.
Oh, I hate those.
They're harmless, though. As we fall deeper into sleep, we enter stage 2, where brainwaves continue to slow down, and we see these characteristic bursts of activity called sleep spindles.
Sleep spindles, what are those?
They're thought to play a role in memory consolidation, transferring information from short-term to long-term memory. Then we descend into slow-wave sleep, stages 3 and 4, where brainwaves become even slower and more synchronized.
This is the deep sleep we all crave, right? The one that leaves us feeling refreshed and rejuvenated in the morning.
It is. It's the most restorative stage of sleep, essential for feeling alert and functioning at our best the next day. During slow-wave sleep, our muscles relax, breathing slows down, and heart rate drops. It's like the body is taking a well-deserved break.
It sounds so peaceful, but then something interesting happens. We cycle back up through the stages and enter REM sleep.
Exactly. REM sleep is the stage most associated with dreaming. Our brain activity ramps up, becoming almost as active as when we're awake. We see rapid eye movements, muscle paralysis, and fluctuations in heart rate and breathing.
It's like our bodies are asleep, but our minds are wide awake and putting on a show.
That's a great way to put it. It's during REM sleep that we experience those vivid, often bizarre dreams.
I'm curious, why do we cycle through these stages? What's the purpose of going from deep sleep to this active dreaming state?
That's one of the big mysteries of sleep. We know both slow-wave sleep and REM sleep are essential for different aspects of brain function, but we're still trying to understand the specific roles they play.
It's fascinating, isn't it? We spend so much time sleeping, but it's still a largely unexplored frontier in neuroscience.
It is. And we haven't even touched on sleep disorders, which affect millions of people and can have a significant impact on their lives.
That's true. Sleep apnea, insomnia, narcolepsy, these are all conditions that can disrupt sleep and lead to a host of problems.
Absolutely. And understanding the brain mechanisms underlying sleep and wakefulness is crucial for developing effective treatments for these disorders.
Well, I'm definitely feeling more informed, but also more intrigued by the mystery of sleep. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about something we all experience: stress. It's a part of life, but it can have a profound impact on both our physical and mental well-being.
You're right. Stress is a natural response to challenges and threats. But when it becomes chronic, it can take a toll on our health.
Right, that fight or flight response hardwired into our brains from our ancestors. But I'm guessing that response isn't so helpful when we're stuck in traffic or dealing with a difficult coworker.
Exactly. Our modern world presents us with all sorts of stressors that don't require a physical fight or flight response. And yet, our bodies still react as if we're facing a saber-toothed tiger.
So what's actually happening in our brains and bodies when we experience stress?
Well, it's a complex cascade of events involving multiple communication systems. We have the voluntary nervous system, which controls our conscious movements. Then there's the autonomic nervous system, which regulates those unconscious functions like breathing and heart rate.
Right, the stuff we don't have to think about.
Exactly. And the autonomic nervous system. Exactly. And the autonomic nervous system has two branches. The sympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for that fight-or-flight response, and the parasympathetic nervous system, which helps us calm down and conserve energy.
So when we're stressed, the sympathetic nervous system takes over, putting our bodies on high alert.
Precisely. Heart rate and breathing speed up, blood pressure rises, and digestion slows down. It's all about mobilizing resources for that immediate threat, whether real or perceived.
It's amazing how our bodies can shift gears so quickly, even if it's not always appropriate for the situation.
It is a remarkable system, honed over millennia of evolution. But there's another key player in the stress response: the neuroendocrine system. This involves communication between the brain and the endocrine glands, which release hormones into the bloodstream.
Hormones, those are the chemical messengers that travel throughout the body, right? I'm most familiar with the stress hormone, cortisol.
Cortisol is definitely a major player when it comes to stress. It's released from the adrenal glands and has a wide range of effects on the body. It helps mobilize energy stores, suppresses the immune system, and even impacts brain function.
Okay, so cortisol is essentially prepping the body to deal with whatever challenge is at hand. That makes sense in the short term, right? If you're facing a real threat, you need that extra energy boost and focused attention.
Exactly. It's a vital survival mechanism. But here's where it gets tricky. When stress becomes chronic, those elevated levels of cortisol can start to have negative consequences.
So it's like having that emergency alarm blaring constantly, even when there's no real danger.
That's a great way to put it. And over time, that constant state of high alert can wear down the body's defenses, making us more susceptible to illness. Chronic stress has been linked to a whole host of health problems, from heart disease and high blood pressure to depression and anxiety.
Wow, that's quite a list. It really highlights the importance of managing stress. But what are some effective ways to do that? It seems like stress is an unavoidable part of modern life.
It's true that stress is often unavoidable, but we can certainly learn to manage it more effectively. There are many strategies that can help. Exercise is a great stress reliever because it helps release endorphins, which have mood-boosting effects.
I've definitely found that to be true. Even a short walk can really help clear my head and reduce tension.
Exactly. And relaxation techniques like yoga or meditation can also be incredibly beneficial. They help activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which promotes a sense of calm and relaxation.
It sounds like it's all about finding that balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, the gas pedal and the brakes.
That's a great way to think about it. And don't underestimate the power of social connection. Spending time with loved ones, talking to a therapist, or even just petting your dog can release oxytocin, another hormone that promotes feelings of well-being.
It seems like taking care of our mental health is just as important as taking care of our physical health when it comes to managing stress.
Absolutely. They're interconnected in so many ways.
Well, I'm definitely feeling inspired to prioritize stress management after all this. Okay, let's talk about something a bit more uplifting: the aging brain. There's a common misconception that aging inevitably leads to cognitive decline, but it sounds like that's not necessarily the case.
You're right. We've all heard those jokes about senior moments and memory loss. But the truth is that the aging brain is far more resilient than we often give it credit for.
So what actually happens to our brains as we age?
Well, like any other part of the body, the brain undergoes some changes as we get older. It gradually loses volume and weight, and some of the connections between neurons may weaken or become less efficient.
So it's like a gradual slowing down, like an old computer that takes a bit longer to process information.
In some ways, yes. But the amazing thing is that the brain has a remarkable ability to adapt and compensate for these age-related changes.
So it's not all downhill after a certain age. That's a relief.
Not at all. In fact, research has shown that some cognitive functions actually improve with age.
Really?
Like what? Well, for example, vocabulary and knowledge tend to increase throughout life, and older adults often excel in tasks that require experience, wisdom, and judgment.
So it's like trading in processing speed for wisdom and knowledge. Not a bad trade-off. But what about memory? I know a lot of people worry about memory loss as they get older.
It's true that some aspects of memory can decline with age, particularly those involving recalling specific details or learning new information quickly. But other types of memory, like those involving general knowledge and skills, remain relatively stable. And even when memory challenges arise, there are strategies that can help.
Like what? Give us some tips.
Well, one of the best things you can do for your brain at any age, but especially as you get older, is to stay mentally active. Learning new things, engaging in challenging activities, staying socially connected, all these things can help keep your brain sharp.
So it's like exercise for the brain.
Exactly. And just like physical exercise, mental exercise helps build strength and endurance, making your brain more resilient to age-related changes.
Okay, I'm definitely on board with that. What about diet and lifestyle? Do those play a role in brain health as we age?
They absolutely do. A healthy diet rich in fruits, vegetables, and omega-3 fatty acids is essential for brain function. And regular physical exercise has been shown to have numerous benefits for brain health, including improved blood flow and reduced inflammation.
So taking care of our bodies is also taking care of our brains no matter what our age.
Exactly. It's all interconnected. And of course, getting enough sleep is crucial for cognitive function at any age. Sleep plays a vital role in memory consolidation and overall brain health.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot we can do to support our brain health as we age. It's encouraging to know that cognitive decline isn't inevitable.
It isn't. And with each new discovery in neuroscience, we're gaining a better understanding of how to promote brain health and longevity. Now, are you ready to delve into the world of neurological disorders, and potential therapies.
Absolutely. It's a vast and complex field, but one that holds so much promise for improving people's lives. Let's start with some of the most well-known conditions. Parkinson's disease, for example. It's a neurodegenerative disorder that primarily affects movement, right?
That's right. Parkinson's disease is characterized by the gradual loss of dopamine-producing neurons in a part of the brain called the substantia nigra.
Dopamine, that's the neurotransmitter involved in movement, reward, and motivation, right? We talked about it earlier.
Exactly. And when those dopamine neurons die off, it leads to the classic motor symptoms of Parkinson's tremors, rigidity, slowed movements, and difficulty with balance.
It's like the brain's motor control system is gradually losing its conductor. Are there any effective treatments for Parkinson's?
There is no cure for Parkinson's yet, but there are treatments that can help manage the symptoms and improve quality of life. Medications that increase dopamine levels in the brain can help alleviate some of the motor symptoms, and in some cases, deep brain stimulation, a surgical procedure that involves implanting electrodes in the brain, can be effective in reducing tremors and rigidity.
It's amazing how technology is being used to treat these complex brain disorders.
It really is. And research is ongoing to develop new therapies for Parkinson's, including gene therapy and stem cell therapy, which hold great promise for the future.
I'm curious to learn more about those. It sounds like cutting-edge science.
It is. Gene therapy involves introducing genes into cells to replace or repair faulty genes, while stem cell therapy involves transplanting stem cells into the brain with the hope that they'll differentiate into dopamine-producing neurons and replace those that have been lost.
It's incredible to think that we might one day be able to regenerate brain cells and potentially reverse the course of these devastating diseases.
It's a field with immense potential. And it's not just Parkinson's disease. Researchers are exploring gene therapy and stem cell therapy for a wide range of neurological disorders, including Alzheimer's disease, Huntington's disease, and spinal cord injuries.
It's encouraging to hear that there's so much research and innovation happening in this field. Okay, let's shift our focus to pain. It's something we all experience at some point, but for millions of people, chronic pain is a daily reality.
You're right. Chronic pain is a huge problem, and it can be incredibly debilitating. It affects not only physical health, but also mental and emotional well-being.
So what are we learning about pain from neuroscience?
We're gaining a much deeper understanding of the complex pathways involved in pain perception. We know that pain signals travel from nociceptors, those specialized pain receptors we discussed earlier, along nerves, to the spinal cord, and then up to the brain.
Right, that sensory relay race.
Exactly. But what's interesting is that those pain signals can be modulated along the way. The brain can actually send signals back down to the spinal cord that can either amplify or dampen pain signals.
So the brain has a volume control for pain. That's incredible.
It is. And this descending pain modulation system is one of the key targets for pain management therapies.
So some treatments aim to turn down the volume on those pain signals.
Exactly. There are a variety of approaches, including medications, physical therapy, and even psychological techniques like cognitive behavioral therapy, which can help people reframe their thoughts and perceptions of pain.
It sounds like a multifaceted approach is often the most effective.
You're right. Pain is a complex experience, and it often requires a combination of therapies to address both the physical and emotional components.
Okay, let's talk about another neurological disorder, epilepsy. It's a condition that causes seizures, right?
That's right. Epilepsy is characterized by recurrent seizures, which are caused by abnormal electrical activity in the brain. It's like a sudden surge of electrical energy that disrupts normal brain function.
And seizures can manifest in many different ways, right?
They can. Some people experience generalized seizures, where the abnormal electrical activity spreads throughout the brain. These can involve loss of consciousness and convulsions. Others experience focal seizures, where the activity is confined to a specific area of the brain.
So the effects of a seizure would depend on where this abnormal electrical activity is happening in the brain.
Exactly. A focal seizure might cause strange sensations like tingling or numbness or visual disturbances, depending on the location.
It's a bit like an electrical storm in the brain, with the effects varying depending on where the storm hits.
That's a good analogy. And fortunately, there are effective treatments for epilepsy. Medications called anti-epileptic drugs can help reduce the excitability of neurons, making it less likely for those abnormal electrical discharges to occur.
So they're like circuit breakers, preventing those electrical surges.
You could say that. And in some cases, surgery can be an option. If the seizures originate from a specific removable area of the brain, surgery can potentially cure epilepsy.
Wow, that's incredible. Okay, let's move on to a condition that affects mood and emotions. Depression. It's more than just feeling sad or down, right? It's a serious mental illness.
You're absolutely right. Depression is a complex disorder that involves changes in brain chemistry, neural circuits, and even gene expression. It's not just a matter of willpower or snapping out of it.
So what's happening in the brain when someone is experiencing depression?
Well, we know that several neurotransmitters play a role, including serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine. These are the same neurotransmitters involved in mood, motivation, and reward.
Right, we've talked about those before. So in depression, are the levels of these neurotransmitters out of balance?
That's one possibility. And one of the main goals of treatment is to restore that balance, whether through medication or therapy.
So medications like antidepressants can help by increasing the levels of those key neurotransmitters. They're like chemical rebalancers.
In a way, yes. And there are different types of antidepressants, each working in slightly different ways. Some increase the availability of serotonin, while others target norepinephrine or dopamine. The choice of medication often depends on the individual's specific symptoms and needs.
Okay, so medication is one approach. But what about other forms of treatment for depression?
Psychotherapy or talk therapy can also be very effective. It helps people identify and change negative thought patterns and behaviors that contribute to depression.
So it's like rewiring those neural pathways.
That's a great way to think about it. And often, a combination of medication and psychotherapy is the most effective approach.
It sounds like a holistic approach, addressing both the biological and psychological aspects of depression.
Exactly. And there's growing evidence that lifestyle factors like exercise, diet, and sleep can also play a role in managing depression.
So it's another example of how taking care of our bodies is also taking care of our brains.
It is. It highlights the interconnectedness of our physical and mental health.
Well, I'm definitely feeling more hopeful about the potential for treating depression. Okay, let's talk about another challenging condition, addiction. It can have such devastating consequences for individuals and their families.
It can. Addiction is a chronic relapsing disease characterized by compulsive drug seeking and use despite harmful consequences. It's not just a matter of willpower or making bad choices. Addiction involves profound changes in the brain, particularly in those reward pathways we talked about earlier.
The pathways that involve dopamine, right?
Exactly. Drugs of abuse hijack those reward pathways, flooding the brain with dopamine and creating an intense feeling of pleasure.
So it's like the brain is getting a supercharged dose of reward.
It's a good way to put it. And over time, the brain adapts to those high levels of dopamine, leading to tolerance needing more of the drug to achieve the same effect.
And I'm guessing that's when addiction really takes hold.
It is. The brain becomes so accustomed to those high dopamine levels that it starts to crave the drug, even when it's no longer pleasurable. And withdrawal symptoms, which can be very unpleasant, kick in when the drug is absent.
So it's like the brain is trapped in the cycle of craving and withdrawal. It sounds incredibly difficult to break free from that.
It can be very challenging, but there are effective treatments available. Medications can help reduce cravings and manage withdrawal symptoms, making it easier to abstain from the drug. And behavioral therapies, like cognitive behavioral therapy and motivational interviewing, can help people develop coping skills and strategies for avoiding relapse.
So it's another example of how a multifaceted approach is often the most effective.
It is. Addiction is a complex disorder, and it requires a combination of therapies to address both the biological and psychological aspects.
Okay, let's move on to another condition that's often misunderstood, Alzheimer's disease. It's a heartbreaking condition that robs people of their memories and cognitive abilities.
It is. Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia, and it affects millions of people worldwide. It's a progressive neurodegenerative disease, which means that neurons are gradually dying off, leading to a decline in cognitive function.
So what's happening in the brain in Alzheimer's disease? What causes those neurons to die off?
Well, we see these characteristic changes in the brain, including the buildup of amyloid plaques and tau tangles.
Amyloid plaques and tau tangles, what are those?
Amyloid plaques are clumps of protein that accumulate between neurons, disrupting communication. And tau tangles are twisted fibers of protein that form inside neurons, interfering with their function.
So it's like the brain is getting clogged up with these abnormal proteins.
That's a good analogy. And over time, these changes lead to the classic symptoms of Alzheimer's: memory loss, confusion, difficulty with language, and changes in personality and behavior.
It's heartbreaking to think about. And is there a cure for Alzheimer's?
Unfortunately, no, not yet. But there are treatments that can help manage the symptoms and slow down the progression of the disease. Medications can help boost levels of acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter that's important for memory and learning. And there are also medications that target those amyloid plaques, trying to clear them from the brain.
So it's like trying to unclog those pathways and restore communication between neurons.
Exactly. And research is ongoing to develop new and more effective treatments for Alzheimer's, as well as to better understand the underlying causes and risk factors.
It's a field that's desperately in need of breakthroughs. Okay, let's talk about a condition that affects learning and reading. Dyslexia. It's not just a matter of seeing letters backward, right? It's a real learning disorder.
You're right. Dyslexia is a neurodevelopmental disorder that makes it difficult to learn to read and spell. It's not due to a lack of intelligence or effort. It's thought to be caused by differences in the way the brain processes language, particularly phonological processing, the ability to recognize and manipulate the sounds of language.
So it's like having trouble breaking down words into their individual sounds.
Exactly. And this difficulty can make it challenging to connect those sounds with the written letters that represent them, which makes learning to read and spell incredibly difficult.
I can see how that would be a huge obstacle. But are there effective interventions for dyslexia?
There are. Specialized reading programs that focus on phonological awareness and phonics can help children with dyslexia develop those crucial skills.
So it's like giving them the tools they need to decode language.
Exactly. And early intervention is key. The earlier children with dyslexia receive support.
It's another reminder of how plasticity and early intervention can make a big difference.
Absolutely. And with the right support, children with dyslexia can go on to achieve great things. Now, are you ready to explore the impact of stroke on the brain?
Absolutely. Stroke is a medical emergency that can have devastating consequences. It's often referred to as a brain attack, right?
That's a good way to think about it. A stroke occurs when the blood supply to a part of the brain is interrupted either by a blockage or a rupture of a blood vessel. This deprives that area of the brain of oxygen and nutrients, which can quickly lead to cell death.
So the brain cells essentially start to die off.
That's right. And the effects of a stroke depend on which part of the brain is affected.
I imagine it could affect a wide range of functions.
It can. Stroke can affect movement, speech, sensation, vision, cognitive abilities. Basically any function controlled by the damaged area of the brain. And the severity of the effects depends on the extent of the damage.
Scary thought. Is there anything that can be done to prevent strokes?
There are certainly things you can do to reduce your risk of stroke, such as maintaining a healthy blood pressure, controlling cholesterol levels, not smoking, eating a healthy diet, getting regular exercise.
So it's about living a heart-healthy lifestyle, which in turn protects your brain.
Exactly. And if someone is showing signs of a stroke, it's crucial to get medical attention immediately.
Why is that?
Because the sooner blood flow is restored to the brain, the less damage there will be. There are effective treatments, like clot-busting medications, that can help minimize brain damage if administered quickly.
So time is of the essence.
It is. And even after a stroke, rehabilitation therapies like physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy can help people regain lost function and improve their quality of life.
So it's another example of how the brain's plasticity can be harnessed for healing and recovery. That's reassuring. Okay, let's talk about another type of injury that can have a major impact on the nervous system's spinal cord injuries.
You're right. The spinal cord is the main communication pathway between the brain and the rest of the body. And when it's injured, those signals can be disrupted, leading to a range of problems.
So it's like cutting off the communication lines between the brain and the body.
That's a good way to put it. And the effects of a spinal cord injury depend on the location and severity of the damage.
So an injury higher up on the spinal cord would have more widespread effects.
That's right. Injuries in the cervical region of the spine, which is the neck area, can affect all four limbs, leading to quadriplegia. Injuries lower down in the thoracic or lumbar regions may affect the legs, leading to paraplegia.
It's a devastating condition. And is there a cure for spinal cord injuries?
Unfortunately, no, not yet. But research is ongoing to develop therapies that could potentially regenerate damaged spinal cord tissue and restore function.
Regenerate spinal cord tissue. That sounds incredible.
It is. Scientists are exploring a variety of approaches, including stem cell therapy, gene therapy, and even bioengineered scaffolds that could help guide nerve regeneration.
So it's like rebuilding those communication lines between the brain and the body.
Exactly. And while we're not there yet, there's a lot of hope and excitement in the field of spinal cord injury research.
It's encouraging to know that there are scientists dedicated to finding solutions for these complex and challenging conditions. Okay, let's move on to a group of conditions that affect mental health. Anxiety disorders, they're the most common mental illnesses affecting millions of people.
That's right. Anxiety disorders are characterized by excessive fear and worry that can interfere with daily life.
So it's more than just feeling nervous or stressed.
It is. Anxiety disorders involve a complex interplay of factors, including genetics, brain chemistry, and life experiences. We know that certain areas of the brain, like the amygdala and the hippocampus, play key roles in processing fear and anxiety.
Right, the amygdala is that almond-shaped structure that's often referred to as the brain's fear center, right?
Exactly. It's involved in detecting and responding to threats. And the hippocampus, which we discussed earlier in the context of memory, is involved in forming and retrieving memories, including those associated with fearful experiences.
So in anxiety disorders, are these brain regions overactive? Or are they not functioning properly?
It could be a combination of factors. There might be increased activity in these regions, or there might be dysregulation in the communication between these regions and other parts of the brain. And neurotransmitters like serotonin and GABA also play a role.
GABA, that's the inhibitory neurotransmitter, right? The one that calms things down.
Exactly. And in anxiety disorders, GABA levels might be too low, leading to increased excitability in the brain. It's like the brain's braking system isn't working properly.
So it's like those fear and anxiety signals are getting amplified because there's not enough GABA to dampen them down. Are there effective treatments for anxiety disorders?
Yes, there are. Medications like anti-anxiety drugs and antidepressants can help regulate those neurotransmitter levels. And psychotherapy, like cognitive behavioral therapy, can help people identify and change those negative thought patterns and behaviors that contribute to anxiety.
So it's another example of how a multifaceted approach can be helpful.
It is. And lifestyle factors like exercise, relaxation techniques, and good sleep hygiene can also play a role in managing anxiety.
That makes sense. If we're taking care of our physical and mental health, we're likely to be more resilient to those anxiety-provoking triggers.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance and building those coping mechanisms.
Okay, let's talk about another serious mental illness, schizophrenia. It's a condition that affects thinking, perception, and behavior in profound ways.
It is. Schizophrenia is a complex disorder, and it can be incredibly challenging for those affected and their loved ones. It's thought to involve a combination of genetic and environmental factors that disrupt brain development and function.
So it's not just one single cause.
That's right. It's a multifactorial disorder. And we see a variety of changes in the brain, including structural abnormalities and imbalances in neurotransmitters, particularly dopamine.
Dopamine again. So in schizophrenia, is there too much dopamine? Or is it not being used properly?
It seems to be a combination of factors. In schizophrenia, there's often an overactivity of dopamine in certain brain pathways, which can contribute to those hallucinations and delusions that are often associated with the condition.
Hallucinations and delusions, those are some of the most distressing symptoms of schizophrenia, right?
They can be. Hallucinations are sensory experiences that aren't real, like hearing voices or seeing things that aren't there. And delusions are false beliefs that are firmly held, even when there's evidence to the contrary. It's like the brain is misinterpreting reality.
That must be terrifying for those experiencing it. Are there effective treatments for schizophrenia?
There are. Antipsychotic medications are the mainstay of treatment. They work by blocking dopamine receptors in the brain, helping to reduce those hallucinations and delusions.
So they're like dopamine blockers.
It's a good way to think about it. And psychotherapy, like cognitive behavioral therapy and social skills training, can also be helpful in managing the symptoms and improving quality of life.
It sounds like a multi-pronged approach is needed.
It is. Schizophrenia is a chronic illness, and it often requires ongoing treatment and support. But with the right interventions, people with schizophrenia can live meaningful and fulfilling lives.
That's encouraging to hear. Okay, let's talk about multiple sclerosis. It's an autoimmune disease that affects the brain and spinal cord, right?
That's right. In multiple sclerosis, or MS, the body's immune system mistakenly attacks the myelin sheath, the protective covering that surrounds nerve fibers.
Myelin, that's the fatty insulation that helps nerve signals travel efficiently, right?
Exactly. And when that myelin is damaged, it disrupts those nerve signals, leading to a wide range of symptoms.
Like what?
Well, MS can affect vision, balance, coordination, sensation, and even cognitive function. And the symptoms can vary widely from person to person, which can make it challenging to diagnose.
So it's a bit of a chameleon disease.
It is. It can be unpredictable, and the symptoms can come and go, which adds to the complexity of diagnosis and treatment.
Is there a cure for MS?
Unfortunately, no.
Eh.
Not yet. But there are treatments that can help manage the symptoms and slow down the progression of the disease. Medications can help modify the immune system's activity, reducing those attacks on myelin. And there are therapies to address specific symptoms, like fatigue, muscle spasms, and pain.
So it's another example of how research is leading to better treatments and hope for those facing these challenging conditions.
It is. And with ongoing research, we're getting closer to understanding the underlying causes of MS and developing even more effective therapies.
Well, I'm definitely feeling more informed and optimistic after all this. Okay, let's talk about Down syndrome. It's a genetic disorder that causes intellectual disabilities and developmental delays.
That's right. Down syndrome is caused by an extra copy of chromosome 21.
Chromosome 21, that's one of the 23 pairs of chromosomes we inherit from our parents, right?
Exactly. And having that extra copy of chromosome 21 disrupts normal development, leading to the characteristic features of Down syndrome.
Like what?
Well, people with Down syndrome often have distinct facial features, such as upward slanting eyes and a flattened nasal bridge. They may also have low muscle tone heart defects and an increased risk of certain medical conditions, including Alzheimer's disease.
So it's a complex condition that affects multiple systems in the body.
It is. And while there's no cure for Down syndrome, there are many interventions and therapies that can help people with Down syndrome reach their full potential.
Like what?
Early intervention programs can help with speech and language development, motor skills, and cognitive abilities. And educational support can help children with Down syndrome succeed in school.
So it's all about providing the right support and opportunities to help them thrive.
Exactly. And with the right interventions, people with Down syndrome can live happy, fulfilling lives. Now, are you ready to explore Huntington's disease?
Absolutely. Huntington's disease is a devastating neurodegenerative disorder that I don't know much about.
It is a challenging condition. It's caused by a mutation in a single gene, the Huntington gene, and it leads to the progressive breakdown of nerve cells in the brain.
A single gene. That's both amazing and terrifying at the same time.
It is, and the symptoms of Huntington's disease typically appear in midlife between the ages of 30 and 50.
So it's a late onset disorder.
Yes, and the symptoms can include involuntary movements, cognitive decline, and psychiatric problems.
So it affects both the body and the mind.
It does. And unfortunately, there's no cure for Huntington's disease yet. But there are treatments that can help manage the symptoms and improve quality of life.
Like what?
Medications can help control the involuntary movements and address some of the psychiatric symptoms, and supportive care such as physical therapy and speech therapy can help people maintain their function and quality of life for as long as possible.
It's a challenging condition, but it sounds like research is ongoing to develop new therapies.
It is. Scientists are exploring a variety of approaches, including gene therapy and stem cell therapy, with the hope of slowing down or even reversing the progression of the disease.
It's encouraging to know that there's active research happening.
Yeah,
Okay, let's talk about Tourette syndrome. It's a neurological disorder that causes dyslexics, right?
that's right. Tourette syndrome, or TS, is characterized by involuntary repetitive movements and vocalizations, which are called Touretics.
So it's like having these uncontrollable urges to move or make sounds.
Exactly. And the tics can vary widely in severity and frequency. Some people might have mild tics that are barely noticeable, while others might have more severe tics that can be disruptive to daily life.
And what causes Tourette syndrome?
Well, it's thought to be caused by a combination of genetic and environmental factors, but the exact mechanisms are still being investigated.
So we're still piecing together the puzzle.
We are. But we know that TS involves abnormalities in certain brain circuits, particularly those involved in movement and impulse control.
And are there treatments for Tourette syndrome?
There are. Medications can help reduce the severity of tics, and behavioral therapies, like habit reversal training, can help people manage their tics and reduce their impact on daily life.
So it's another example of how a combination of approaches can be helpful.
It is. And it's important to remember that many people with PS live full and successful lives. Okay, let's wrap up our deep dive with a look at brain tumors. They're a serious condition, but it sounds like treatment options are improving.
That's right. Brain tumors are abnormal growths of cells in the brain, and they can be either benign or malignant.
Benign tumors are non-cancerous, while malignant tumors are cancerous and can spread to other parts of the body. And the symptoms of a brain tumor can vary depending on its location and size.
So the location of the tumor really matters.
It does. Some tumors might cause headaches, seizures, or vision problems. Others might affect movement, speech, or cognitive abilities.
So it really depends on where that abnormal growth is happening in the brain.
Exactly. And diagnosis often involves imaging techniques like MRI and CT scans to pinpoint the tumor's location and size.
And I'm guessing the treatment options also depend on those factors.
You're right. Surgery is often the first line of treatment, especially for benign tumors. Radiation therapy and chemotherapy can also be used to target and destroy tumor cells.
So it's a multifaceted approach, just like with many of the other conditions we've discussed. It's amazing how far we've come in understanding and treating these complex brain disorders.
It really is.
Yeah.
And research is ongoing to develop even more targeted and effective therapies for brain tumors, improving the outlook for patients.
It's encouraging to hear that progress is being made. Now, before we wrap up our deep dive into the brain, let's talk about those incredible advancements in brain imaging. They've really revolutionized our understanding of this complex organ.
They have. We've gone from having a limited view of the brain to being able to see its structure and activity in remarkable detail. It's like having a window into the inner workings of the mind.
I'm thinking of techniques like MRI, PE scans, and EEG. They allow us to see things that were once hidden from view.
Exactly. MRI, or magnetic resonance imaging, uses powerful magnets and radio waves to create detailed images of the brain's anatomy. It's like taking a high-resolution snapshot of the brain's structure.
So we can see the different regions of the brain, the folds and grooves, the white matter and gray matter. It's incredible.
It is. And PE scans, or positron emission tomography, go a step further. They use radioactive tracers to measure brain activity, allowing us to see which areas of the brain are most active during different tasks.
So it's like watching the brain in action, seeing which parts light up when we're thinking, feeling, or moving.
Precisely. And EEG, or electroencephalography, measures the brain's electrical activity using electrodes placed on the scalp.